Hi, it's Ray from IELTSfocus.com. Now today I'd like to look at the speaking test, especially IELTS Part 2 and Part 3 of the speaking test. These tend to be the most challenging for a lot of students. And Part 2, is where you get the cue card where you have to talk for about 2 minutes. And Part 3 is where you talk in more detail and you expand on your answers where you're asked actual questions. So if you look at the presentation all the way through, at the end of it, there's a free PDF, by the way, free ebook that you can download. Actually, the ebook is connected to writing task 2, so not the speaking. But in this presentation, I'd like to look at some tips and ideas to help you in Part 2 and Part 3 of the speaking test. So let's get started. Okay, so I just want to look at Part 2 and 3 here. Part 1 of the speaking test is actually quite easy, it's quite straightforward. It's really about yourself. You're talking about, your daily routine or your job, and you just talk really about your own experience. It's quite straightforward. So Part 2 and 3 are the most difficult. Let's look at Part 2, especially. So you probably know already, you'll be given a topic on a card by the examiner, and there's no questions on this card. You'll be asked to describe something and to talk about the points on the card in more detail. And your fluency is very important here. This means that you have to be able to speak non-stop for at least a minute and a half or 2 minutes. Now it lasts about 3 minutes. You get a minute to prepare, so you can take some notes while you're in the exam for 1 minute, and then you get 2 minutes to talk. Here's an example of a topic card. So describe, that's a key word here, describe something. So describe something healthy you enjoy doing, and you should say, what you do, where you do it. Now the key word here is should. It doesn't mean you have to. So there's no rule here about using these points on the card. You can add your own ideas as long as you stay on topic. So another thing is explain. So you have to explain why you think doing this is healthy. So describe and explain. Let's look at some common problems in Part 2 and Part 3 of the speaking test. First of all, hesitating. This is a real issue for a lot of students who are doing IELTS. Now, if you're not sure what to talk about, then you'll hesitate and you'll pause for thought. And the examiner will see this as poor fluency, and it will negatively affect your score. So practice talking for 2 minutes non-stop and giving examples and detail. So you have to keep the talk going, you have to keep it moving naturally for at least 2 minutes. Now, if you are given some kind of topic and you don't know what to say, you can just make up a story, you can make up the details. It doesn't have to be true. A second problem is self-correcting. So if you have anxiety about your grammar or your vocabulary, then you'll start worrying and you'll start going back and correcting yourself. This will also be marked by the examiner as poor fluency. So try not to worry too much about mistakes, because it doesn't matter how good your English is, you'll still make mistakes, small mistakes, or you may even make more than a few mistakes. In fact, you can still get a band 7 even if you're making some simple mistakes. Obviously your grammar has to be good and your vocabulary has to be good, but if you're worrying too much about it and you're anxious about it, then you're going to self-correct, and of course you're going to hesitate. So focus on your fluency, focus on your talk, keep it moving. And then there's the speed. If you're speaking too fast, it shows that you're nervous and you'll make a lot of mistakes. And also the examiner might not understand what you're trying to say because you're just talking too fast. And then in the opposite side of things, if you're speaking too slow, this will show that you are having problems with fluency, so you need time to think. And this will bring your band score right down. So you need to really practice on the pace of your talk. You've got to give a well-paced talk with a natural speed, and just keep practicing that speed there. In part 3 is where you'll give a lot more detail and you'll expand on your answer. So some useful tips for part 2 speaking. You don't have to talk about everything on the cue card. You can add your own ideas, but you need to stay on topic. So if you're given a card and it says describe a car journey you took, and you start talking about a meal you had in a restaurant, that's a completely different topic, so that's no good. You've got to keep on that general topic. And if you don't want to use the ideas on the card, you can use your own ideas, as I say. When you start your talk, you should start with I'd like to talk about, or I'm going to talk about, and then you can move on with your talk. And be careful when using idioms. If you don't know how to use idioms, then it could create confusion and it could go against you and lower your score. So my advice is just don't use idioms in part 2 or part 3 of the speaking test. Now, if the topic is something like, for example, describe a country you've been to, and maybe you have no experience of that, you haven't been overseas, you could change it around and say, well, I haven't been overseas, but if I had the chance, I'd go to Canada or whatever. It's a good technique because even though you don't know or you don't have any experience of that, you're changing the sentence around, you're changing the grammar a little bit here. We're using a conditional sentence, an if sentence. Of course, another way of doing it is you could just you could lie. You could just make up a story. You could say, I've been to, America or whatever, even if you haven't been there. And do not memorize answers or scripts in your head. There's no right or wrong way to approach the part 2 of the speaking task, but it has to sound natural. So there's no right or wrong answer, but it's got to be your own answer. It's got to be natural and not scripted. Examiners know when an answer is memorized, so be careful of that. Another thing is, don't worry about the timing of your talk. If you're talking and you're thinking to yourself, is it 2 minutes? Have I finished yet? It will create a sense of anxiety. So just keep speaking, and the examiner will actually stop you when the 2 minutes are up. Now let's look at some common question types in part 3 of the speaking. So in part 3 of the speaking test, it's connected to part 2, whatever topic you had in part 2, then part 3 will have a very similar topic, and you'll be asked questions, and this is where you'll talk in more detail and you'll be able to expand on your ideas. This part of the test lasts for about 5 minutes. Some common types of questions: you might be asked to give your opinion on something, or you may have a question where there's a prediction. You may have to make a prediction about the future. Or talking about other people. This is a common type of question. Do people in your country blah blah blah? So you have to talk about other people as opposed to yourself. Comparing, contrasting things, making a comparison with the past, and cause and effect. Now, for more detail on these types of questions and some example responses, go to IELTSfocus.com/IELTS speaking, and if you scroll down you'll see some recent lessons, and there's the 6 common question types for part 3. This blog post gives a lot more detail about the types of questions you're going to get and some example responses. Let's look at an example topic and some kind of structure now for part 3. So let's say the topic is about shopping, and you may be asked a question: do you think shopping habits are likely to change in the future? I can see that this question is asking for an opinion, and it's also asking for a prediction about the future. So first of all, I give an opinion. So as far as I'm concerned, shopping habits will change considerably over the next few years, especially with buying online and the way we use cash. So this phrase, as far as I'm concerned, this is giving an opinion. This is a kind of informal way to give an opinion. Now you wouldn't use this in the writing tasks, the writing task 2, because it's too informal. But it's fine for the speaking. The speaking test, by the way, is quite informal. It's not a formal test. Now then I give a reason. So one reason for this is that most people prefer online shopping. Carrying paper cash is becoming less popular. Using a credit card is a much easier way to shop. So the main thing I'm talking about here is the way people will be using credit cards and online shopping in their shopping habits. And then we give an example. For instance, if you want to buy books or a PC or anything, it's much cheaper to buy online, much quicker. We've got options like Apple Pay, PayPal. Even if you buy in a high street shop, using a credit card is more common. And this shows that shopping is becoming more efficient and digital, and that shopping habits are changing. So I'm keeping on the topic there of shopping habits. And in the last sentence, I've restated my opinion. In the future, I think that no one will be using cash when they go shopping. So we're keeping on the topic, and we've got some phrases there like, as far as I'm concerned, one reason is, and for instance. So you give an opinion, a reason, and an example. So let's look at some tips now for IELTS speaking. Get a list of Part 2 and Part 3 topics. You can find these online, or you can find it in IELTS, IELTS.org or British Council or some official IELTS books. You just find Part 2 and Part 3 topics and think about how you would give a talk. Make some notes on what you could say for each of those, and think of 5 words you could use connected to each of the topics. So what you're doing is you're building a vocabulary bank, a word bank for each topic, especially the most difficult ones. So you're actually building your vocabulary, and then when it comes to doing the IELTS test, you've got a lot of words to choose from. You've got a little vocabulary bank. Use your iPhone, record yourself answering the questions for the speaking test, and then play back your recording, and you can then pay attention to the mistakes you're making and your intonation, for example. And that gets to the next point of pronunciation and intonation. These are actually very important in the speaking test. So if you have problems with your pronunciation or your intonation, get somebody to give you feedback on your weak points. Maybe you have a teacher in your area. They can give you some ideas on how to improve your pronunciation and to work on your intonation. So there's 3 things really, is fluency, pronunciation, intonation. Now of course grammar and vocabulary are important, but if you're suffering from anxiety there, it's going to cause even more problems. So work on your fluency. Practice giving answers to the most difficult topics in the speaking section. Maybe you have trouble speaking about a work of art, or a museum you visited, or a gift you received. These are Part 2 topics, by the way. Whatever the topic is that is really difficult, practice it as much as possible, and practice speaking for 2 minutes non-stop. So I hope this has been of some help to you. Thanks for your time. By the way, there's a free ebook for the IELTS Writing Task 2. If you go to this URL here, and you'll see this page, you just click on the red button and you can download a free ebook. It's a PDF. I think it's about 13 pages long or so, and that should help you in your writing tasks. So thanks for your time, and all the best. Thanks a lot. Bye.